Let's crack open a beer and share some thoughts.
Welcome to Opinions, and we're back in your ears once again. The beer is in the glass and we're ready to go. But we're not alone this week, are we, Martin?
No, not at all, Steve. I'd like to welcome Dani and Tom from Little Earth Project. Thanks for joining us.
Hiya.
Hi.
It's great to have you on the show with us, folks. Tom, I'm going to jump straight to you to introduce the first beer that we're drinking this week.
Okay, so it's a Farmhouse lager. So it's a lager. It was brewed with lager yeast, at least to begin with. Pale malt, German hops. It's got a little bit of a carbonation to it. Probably not quite as much as you'd expect with a lager, but certainly a bit there. But it's got our own little Little Earth twist on it. So we put some of our mixed culture into the tank after it had been lagered, and kind of let the wild yeast have a go at it as well.
It's actually smelling really great, so I'm really looking forward to giving this a try. Cheers.
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 I really like that.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's very light and refreshing, actually. Considering the way you described it, Tom, it's a lot of subtle nuances rather than anything slapping me in the face, to be honest.
Yeah, I think we're trying to go down that path a bit more than when we first started, which, you know, we were learning when we were first brewing as well, this style of beer. And lots of the beers were kind of quite sour and quite in your face. And you kind of, the more you drink these type of beers, the more you notice the nuances and the kind of subtle flavors. And that's what we're trying to get in this. We want it to be kind of a easy drinking beer rather than something that blows your head off.
This one is also aged in stainless as well. So it doesn't pick, obviously a lot of our beers tend to have a bit more of a barrel character. Whereas this one, because it is stainless, it is a bit cleaner, I think, on the finish. The sour that comes through is kind of a nice, like you said, refreshing kind of tang, as opposed to like a really tannic hit that you can kind of get with some of the other beers that we do. It's also a lower ABV as well, which makes it.
That's what I was going to say. It's what 4%, isn't it? Yeah, I think it's very light. I think it still finishes quite dry and crisp, which is what I look for in a lager. So it's still giving me that refreshing hit. To close aside some of the bits you described, Tom, I would say I'm sort of getting a little bit of a lemony feel to it on the flavour. And there's lots of lagers which some of the more complex lagers I've had recently, they had a bit of lemon in them. But this one, considering, like I said, everything you described about it, it just comes across as it's still very clean, very refreshing, and very much still a lager for me. What's your thinking, Steve?
I think it's super crisp and super refreshing. That finish on it is almost perfect in terms of the balance of, as you say, Dani, it's more on the tart, tangy side than it is on the lemon sucking sour side, and that's when it comes to these sorts of styles of beers. That's what I prefer is a bit more of the tart, tangy rather than the sour. It all works together really well for me. I think from the nose you get this lovely kind of funky nose that you pick up a little bit of. For me, there's a little bit of peach in there on the nose, and then as you start to drink it, that you just get these different waves of citrus. And as Martin said, the dominant one at the finish being lemon, which for the style, I think that would work really well. I mean, as a beer to drink in the height of the summer, this would be absolutely storming in terms of its refreshment level, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Shandy.
Yeah. I was literally, as I was saying that, I was just thinking, I think this would give some Radlers a run for their money in terms of the ABV as well. At that 4%, it could actually be really sessionable and give you a lot of refreshment as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sold quite well since we've had it kind of, well, most of the summer actually, because we did it in 30-liter kegs as well. So we actually had larger quantities of it to put on. And it actually sold quite well. I had a guy come in saying he would like a keg for his wedding, and he's now become a regular, and like that's quite nice. So I mean, it certainly surprised us, because I think when we wanted to do it, it wasn't really like obviously it wasn't a style we'd done before, but it just, lagers are something that we've definitely drank a lot more of in the last couple of years. And something a bit, like I said, sessionable, but still having that LEP twist with it being that kind of tart, tangy vibes, but more, like I said, less of a acetic or acidic hit.
More approachable.
Yeah, definitely, which is what we're trying to do a bit more of, stuff that kind of introduces people to it without kind of potentially scaring them. So people like you, Steve, like to get them into it.
I'd be curious to know. I mean, because obviously your MO is these kind of beers, and I presume we'll get into it. You have a natural love for them. I love the sour and tart beers, and Steve is early on in his journey. I would be really curious to know what it'd be like either transporting myself back, say, 20 years and going from my mainstream lager to this, and whether it'd be less subtle. So if you go from drinking the macro lagers on a regular basis, then you're presented with this, would it still be as subtle, or would I pick out a bit more because I'm not used to it?
Yeah, I think you probably would. And some people that we have come into the pub have they've seen it as a lager, and they think, oh, I drink lager, and they've tried it and
been like, oh, something's wrong with it. It's all.
Yeah, this is definitely not right.
So it's kind of, you've got to kind of prep people and kind of make sure people are in the right frame of mind to try it. I think if you see it, which I guess when we sell it to other bars and stuff, I hope people kind of, I don't say are educated enough, but like want to share that fact about it with people when they, it's not just going to be a pint of your normal lager. It is going to be a bit funky. It is going to be a bit different. As long as there's an open mind to trying it, I think that anyone could kind of move into it.
Well, I think you've got two things there, haven't you? You've got the people that enjoy beer, that know what Little Earth Project are about and what you do. They're going to know what to expect when they see a lager from you folks. Whereas those people that maybe don't know who you are, I think potentially there's a role for the bar staff to play there, in terms of saying, are you aware this beer is likely to taste a little bit sour, a little bit tart, because that's what it is, rather than just happily selling it and then potentially having people coming back and saying, this beer ain't right, give me something else.
Yeah. I mean, there's lots of people who, even when you tell them, oh, it's a bit different, it's that, do you want to just try a sample? And they go, oh no, I'll just take 2/3. And then they come back 5 minutes later and they go, oh, could I actually?
With their tail between their legs.
But then, like I said, there's the guy who, now comes back every week and he wants a keg for his wedding if he can, and like all this stuff. So, I mean, it goes both ways. There's kind of it's a pretty big, a pretty even split, I think, of people that come in or people that try it. And
hope you prep his wedding guests.
Exactly.
So in terms of this farmhouse lager then, because you don't really have a core range, so to speak, do you? Is this kind of a regular beer that you're going to be producing now, or is it again just going to be as and when the brew schedule allows?
It's with the kind of beer that we make using wild yeast, making regular beers that are very, very consistent is quite difficult. So it's certainly something we want to do again. And we've actually brewed another batch of it, and it's come out slightly different. It's slightly stronger. We used slightly different hops because that's what we had at hand at the time. So yeah, like everything we do, we will try and repeat things that turn out really well. We'll try and tweak them to make them better. But when you're using wild yeast, and the way that we use it, so we don't have any temperature control in the brewery, so we use the kind of different seasons to try and if we want to brew a beer that's got a cold fermentation, we brew it during the winter, and the kind of the opposite in the summer. So core beers aren't really something that we do, but we have kind of a seasonal beers, and beers that kind of we have the same ideas behind them.
So I think one of the beers that we're going to be drinking a little bit later on is kind of your annual release, isn't it? That you do versions of every year.
Yeah, so we do a blend of. Can we say the name of it?
Yeah. I don't know why I'm being so secretive about it.
All right.
It'll be in the show notes. People know what we're drinking.
So it's Stupid Sexy Suffolk. So that blend, we're on blend 4 right now. Also, we do Organic Harvest Saison every September. So that one's brewed with all of our own organic hops, malt, obviously our mixed culture yeast. So that one is, and it's brewed with the fresh hops we picked straight off the vine and straight into the barrel, basically. And that's done every year. And all these other ones that we're kind of experimenting with, if it's one that we really like or one that's gone over really well, potentially we tweak it slightly. We've had our heritage porter, our heritage brown porter, we just released a second version of, but the first one was 3-4 years ago, maybe. So it's kind of as and when. It's not necessarily like, I think the ones that you can generally count on or are like the organic harvest, like I said, seasonal ones. So the organic harvest will happen every September, essentially. And the Stupid Sexy it's because it's a blend, you've kind of got a little bit more reliance on when the barrels are ready and when things are kind of at the level. We did a blend a couple of years ago and it was 10 barrels, I think, whereas this last one, I think was maybe 5 barrels. So it kind of depends, like I said, where they're at. We've also done a batch of one that's, I want to say 32 months, but it's 26 or 32 months. Don't quote me off the top of my head, but a Stupid Sexy, just 1 barrel that we bottled, as a reserve. It kind of fed into a couple blends, but then we kind of packaged
just 1 barrel,
the 1 barrel of it as well. So it's kind of different iterations. We've taken single barrels of that blend and added, like we did a red currant version. We've done a Bramling Cross, kind of dry hopped it with Bramling Cross. So there's kind of different things we've done with them to kind of keep it interesting. So it maybe isn't just the same beers all the time, but we still kind of want to have the core blend as well, just because it's nice to have that one to fall back on, and it's delicious. So.
When you're producing kind of mixed fermentation beers that we do, that you're using wild yeast, and it's very different to normal brewing. So normal brewing, you will come up with a recipe and you'll have kind of an end beer in mind, and you will do everything, every little thing is kind of honed down to make that end beer exactly the end beer that you want. Whereas we brew a beer and kind of let it take its own path, and then we see where that path is taking it, and then we'll blend it with maybe another barrel, or we'll add fruit to it, or we'll barrel it, or we'll bottle it earlier than we thought we were going to, or leave it longer. It's kind of brewing backwards is the way that I kind of look at it.
And that entire process that you go through, is that all down to you, Tom, by essentially playing it by ear, so to speak, in terms of you might taste a batch of something and say, oh, this is ready now, I want to bottle it now, and also I want to save a little bit of it to do something else with in the future. Is it all kind of a little bit, I suppose it's a terrible analogy, but it's a little bit fumbling around in the dark, not really knowing when a beer is going to be ready?
I was going to say, is it winging it? But yes, fumbling around in the dark, why not?
It doesn't allow me to do any sort of organization or planning, that's for sure.
So yeah, we do most of our packaging and brewing during the winter. It's a better time to brew our kind of beer, and we tend to have more time as well because there's less things going on at the pub. So kind of throughout the winter, I'll be looking at kind of what barrels are ready, what we can do with them, what tank space we've got ready, And so there's lots of different things that play into it. And also if you're getting fruit from, sometimes we forage our own fruit from the hedgerows, and sometimes we're relying on local farmers, and sometimes we're relying on kind of suppliers from further afield as well. So you've got all of these things that play in, and you might not get things at the times you want them or the quantities you want them. It's we kind of look at our beer as kind of very much kind of a natural product. And when you're dealing in a natural product, you're kind of at the mercy of the seasons and supplies of things.
So you're literally at the mercy of nature, Mother Nature, then, most of the time.
Yeah.
One thing, something that really interests me is that obviously what you're describing here, and you're talking about brewing backwards, but let's go back a little bit. Where did your respective beer journey start? And then when did they sort of join up and go into this direction?
Should I start?
Yeah, you go ahead. It's your
So I kind of, as a teenager growing up, my parents liked to go to the pub, have a beer, and they were kind of into their real ale. My dad was a camera member for kind of right back from almost when it was founded. So me and my siblings, we were kind of always taken to the pub, and we had, even though we lived kind of in a very rural place, there was lots of kind of half decent pubs about. So as soon as we were, well, I was going to say as soon as we were old enough to drink, but as soon as the landlords would let us have a pint, we'd go down the pub, and there were certain pubs that would have different real ales on, and we'd try them, and just kind of got into beer that way. And then in 2005, our local pub came on the market, and my dad kind of wanted to get involved with it, and basically ended up buying it. And he'd not had any experience in pubs before, but he had ideas of what to do with it, and kind of what kind of pub he wanted it to be. So as a family, we kind of worked on it. I ended up running it for a little while, kind of 2007 and 8. And at the same time, we were building a brewery next door. If we thought a rural pub in the middle of nowhere, there's 300 people, I think, live in village of Edwardstone, where the pub is. So a brewery seemed like a perfect thing to get people to come and visit you, be a little bit different to some of the other pubs about. So when we first started the brewery next door, it was called Mill Brewing, and we just brewed cask beer, and it was basically just me doing it. And I was kind of just teaching myself. I'd done a short course up at Brew Lab in Sunderland, but lots of it was just learning from the people that installed the kit and learning from other local brewers. And we did that for about 7 years. And it kind of got to a point in 2015 that we'd kind of taken the little cask brewery as far as we could. And to be honest, there were probably people locally that could do it on a bigger scale, more consistently, and at a lower price than we could. And over that time, I personally had kind of got a taste for sour beers, picked up some Belgian beers from various festivals and things, and had kind of been playing around using wild yeast. My family had always made a bit of cider, kind of always as far as I can remember. So back since 1985. and they just press apples and let the juice spontaneously ferment with the yeast that's on the skins of the apples. So when we first started doing this, we used basically some fermenting cider, pitched it into some beer wort, and experimented to see what happened. And luckily for us, it came out all right. So
for a moment there, I thought that story was going to go down the lines of you had a brewery and you let loose some wild beasties in it, and that was that. You then decided you weren't producing cask beer anymore.
I was just so the pub you're referencing, Tom, so that is the pub you're at now, isn't it? That's the Edwardstone White Horse in Suffolk.
Yeah.
So your parents bought the pub back in sort of the mid 2000s.
Yeah.
So you've been sort of there ever since, in one way or another.
Yep. Yeah, I've worked there the entire, however many years it is now.
About 15, I would say now, 15, 16.
Well, most of that time. The first couple of years, I wasn't kind of involved kind of full time. I was helping out occasionally. But yeah, from 2007, so about 15 years.
We still actually get people that come in the pub and ask Tom to brew some of his old mill grain beers. There's a few people that are like, you need to make Tornado Smith or Massachusetts. Like they just, and I've never got to try them. I met Tom after all of that, so I'd like him to brew them somewhere as well, just so I can try them. But that's my plan for the next year and a half, 2 years, is try and get him to do some cask collaborations, just to mix it up a bit. Why not?
Yeah, the brewery is definitely too full of wild yeast.
We'd never do it.
To do clean beer now.
No way you're going back to brewing cask beer in there, is there?
No, you'll have to visit someone else probably to do that. I would suggest.
Yeah. They'd probably hose you down before you walk in as well.
Yeah, they'll put you in one of those hazard suits, head to toe.
Yeah.
Don't let him touch anything. He's definitely covered. So what's your beer journey, Dani?
My beer journey, I suppose, started a little bit later. When I was a young whippersnapper in Canada, I was what I would consider a classic Canadian teenager. So I was more into like stealing rum and vodka from mom's cabinet, but
nothing wrong with that.
Well, there you go. So I moved over to the UK in 2011. It'll be 11 years this year. And all of my friends would tell you that I hate beer and would never drink it, which was true at the time. But I spent about 3-4 months traveling around Europe, as most people do, I suppose, when they move over for the first time, and kind of just visiting lots of beer festivals and beer halls in Germany. I went to a really cool beer festival in Prague, which I actually ended up going to 2 years in a row. I've been to Oktoberfest a couple of times, just kind of started to realize that beer wasn't just Molson Canadian and, things like that. I realized there was a lot more to it, which I found quite interesting. Then I moved to the UK officially. So after traveling, I kind of settled in Edinburgh. I ended up being there for about 7 years. I worked in a hostel for a little while, worked in a nightclub, I worked in a marketing agency, which is kind of my background. But then I worked in a pub in Stockbridge called the Stockbridge Tap, which if you're ever in Edinburgh, highly recommended. They do a really good mix of cask and craft beer. I think it's a little bit more crafty these days compared to when I was there, but it was a really good balance, and it allowed me to really learn about cask, because it's not really a thing in Canada. I think people kind of randomly try and do it, but it's not the same at all as it is here. Just got to meet loads of brewers, and obviously through the drays and dropping off, and people used to come and drink in there quite a bit. So I just kind of got to immerse myself in the beer industry in Edinburgh. I actually didn't mention this beforehand. I did a 6-month stint at Brewdog before my first visa finished, which did also help introduce me to a lot of really interesting American craft beer, which, to be fair, even though I came from Canada, I didn't know many of the breweries that were kind of in America at the time. So it was a really interesting way to kind of, again, further learn more about it's not just macro lager. There's all these other kinds of beers. I really loved when I worked there, for instance, lots of black IPAs. Follow to Andy at Elusive. Love black IPAs. Just dark beers in general I got quite into. And then, yeah, after working at the tap for a few years, I got to know a couple guys who were starting a brewery in Edinburgh. They needed some marketing help. So I decided to start my own business. And I ended up kind of working with them and a couple other people in Edinburgh and just doing kind of marketing, sales, anything basically around the brewery that I could help out with, working in tap room, that kind of thing. Working at festivals. I went and worked at IMBC for New Zealand Beer Collective and Yeasty Boys. I worked with Alchemy, who are an Edinburgh brewery, at Leeds International Beer Festival. So I kind of just got to know lots of people in the industry and decided that it was a place that I felt really comfortable and really enjoyed. And then it was in 2017 that I was working at the Edinburgh Craft Beer Festival I was with Cross Borders by that point, wasn't I? I was. Yeah, so Cross Borders was the brewery I ended up working for in Edinburgh. And I was working at the Edinburgh Craft Beer Festival. Tom was in town showcasing his beers at Salt Horse. I came along to his tasting. That's where we met, and then just kind of chatted, got to know each other. Stalked me on Facebook the following week.
Good man.
So messaged me, and we just kind of went from there, just kind of chatted, and then kind of started flying back and forth from Edinburgh to Suffolk. And then a year in, I realized that he wasn't going to move his brewery to Scotland, so I had to take the jump to move down here. Swore up and down I wasn't going to work for the business and I was going to do my own thing, and there were lots of breweries in the area that I could work with and it was going to be really good. And then within a month of moving here, the pub person that they'd hired to run the pub bailed the day that we were supposed to reopen, and I ended up running the pub for 4 months and basically just slowly started taking on different jobs, and now basically I do all of the paperwork.
So how does Edwardstone compare? Am I saying it right, by the way? I'm never sure.
Yeah. Edwardstone.
How does that compare? I mean, from where you were in Canada to Edinburgh, that part of Suffolk must be quite the little shock to the system when you first land there.
Yeah. I mean, I grew up in the countryside in Canada, so it's about a 10-minute drive through literally nothing to get to the nearest town. I mean, even that town was only 1,500 people, which is about the size of the village that we live in. We're in Boxford, which is a little bit.
Oh, okay.
6 miles from Edwardstone. So we don't live right in Edwardstone. So I was kind of, I mean, I always said I wouldn't live in the countryside again, but here we are. So it's definitely different. But when I first moved down here, I was kind of flying up to Edinburgh like every 3-4 months just to visit friends and going into London. And we're not terribly far. It's only about an hour and a half into London. From Sudbury. So it's not difficult. It's kind of easy enough to get around. Obviously, COVID put a little bit of a damper on the traveling. But it's been fine. I mean, we've been lucky. We've got a house with a yard. And so during COVID, we could still get outside. You could still do things. And it's probably a better place to be locked down in than potentially a big city, really. I still try and get up there quite regularly as well. So, I mean, it's...
Yeah, well, you've definitely got plenty of nice open countryside around the Sudbury, Boxford area as well. So that's really nice. That's really interesting. So your beer journey was a lot shorter, therefore, Dani, and then suddenly you're all into.
I covered a lot of ground.
You have covered a lot of ground in a short space of time, and now it's all sours and tart beers and acidic beers. That is from your. What do your childhood friends in Canada think? Considering this is the person who never used to drink beer.
Well, this is it. I mean, I was home in November for my best friend's wedding. My oldest friend, known her from babies, and that's literally how they introduced me at the wedding and as a bridesmaid. As 10 years ago, you'd never see a beer in this girl's hand, and blah, blah, blah. Everyone thinks it's a hilarious joke when it's my job. So. It's a bit different, even my mom. But I mean, my parents are even gator. I used to bring home beers and stuff, and my mom loves trying them. She loves our beer, she loves the sour beers. Every time we release something, she wants us save it for her. And I can't mail it home, so whenever I go home, I always take a suitcase full so we can have a little beer tasting. And she saves all the bottles. They're on a shelf at home. And yeah, I don't know, they love it. I think I've got a few friends in the brewing industry in Winnipeg as well. So I always kind of bring stuff back and share, and they send stuff back for us. And it's quite cool. I don't know. It's different, but yeah, they find it a bit odd. But I think everyone always kind of knew I'd be in like the drinks industry in one way or another. So.
Well, speaking of drinks, I'll finish that lager. That's gone. Next. Steve hasn't yet, so I'll I could definitely drink pints of that, especially as Steve said, during the summer, or one of those nice sort of bright, warmish spring days. And especially if you've done a bit of a walk around the area where you are, that'd be lovely for quenching the thirst as well.
Yeah, the lemon has really started to kind of develop more. Yeah. Like I think the last time I even tried it, like at least in a bottle, I don't think it was even as lemony as it is now. So it's quite nice to know that that's kind of the flavor that's developing as it ages longer as well. So by this summer, it'll be even more refreshing.
Yeah, and I noticed it says best before 2026. Tom, given how you described, I won't use Steve's turn of phrase for your brewing style, but Steve and I have been talking about this quite a lot offline. How do you pitch that best before date?
It's very difficult because, again, the beer is fairly unpredictable. So most of these beers, the beers that we brewed back in 2015 still taste good now. So, and some of them are a lot better than they were 3 or 4 years ago. So in general, the beers will improve, particularly kind of stronger ones. So the best before dates are more a guide than kind of a definite thing. And in some cases, they might be better after that date. But yeah, they're fairly unpredictable things. So if they're being sold, we've aged them for several months already. So they should be good to go. But they're the kind of beers, if you want to hold on to them, try them before their best before date, try them after.
I've got a couple of your 750s in my beer cupboard. So before the end of the show, I'm going to check, and then I might find out from you when I should be drinking it. Let an expert tell me rather than my wild flailing guessing.
Fumbling around in the dark, mate.
Fumbling around in the dark.
That's what it's all
about. So what did you think of it, Steve?
Much the same as my first thoughts of it. It's really crisp and refreshing. Those lemony notes on the finish really do refresh, and in terms of that being almost a perfect summer's day beer, I can very much agree with what you're saying, Martin. And you could have a nice walk around the Edwardstone area and then come back to the pub and enjoy one of those, and it would very much do the job in terms of quenching the thirst.
Yeah, I definitely think it would. And speaking of quenching the thirst, I've already got the next bottle ready.
Okay, let's while we're getting this into the glass, let's let Tom tell us all about this one then.
Okay, so this is Simcoe Sour, which is we brew a kind of a set of beers that are basically just golden sour beers. So they're with our mixed culture. They go into barrels, mainly barrels that have already been used for one of our other beers, and they just basically sit along a big wall, and we leave them until we think they're good. They're good to go. We use them for blending and then having fruit put in them. And sometime down the line, we're going to do just a plain golden sour, but we've yet to find the right barrels for that yet. But in this case, we had something that was tasting really great, kind of quite dry, quite crisp, not a lot of kind of acetic, that vinegary flavour, something that was fairly easy drinking, And I thought it would go with some hops that I had. They were Simcoe hops, but they were a few years old, so they'd slightly faded. They'd picked up some kind of other flavors. They were kind of maybe a bit more earthy and had got kind of the fruitiness was still there, but there was also some maybe like slight kind of dusty tobacco notes to them as well. So they were kind of an interesting thing to use, that I thought would work quite well with these. This was just two particular barrels, so it was two 200-litre barrels, so 400-litre batch, so fairly small. And yeah, we just put them in a tank and dry hop them for a week or two. So yeah, kind of got some hoppy notes to it, dry, a little bit of acidity, but not over the top. And again, probably a nice summer easy drinker.
Right. Well, after that very full description, cheers, Steve. I'm diving in.
Cheers.
Dusty and woody on the nose.
Yeah, I'd agree. Actually, I've not got a lot else to add to that. Although I was drinking it, I was like, I think I'm going to be all right here, and I'm just sort of like letting the first few sips go down, and then right at the end, there's just this real sour punch to it that just got me a little bit at the end, but very well balanced in terms of its profile. It's not one of those where you take a sip and you instantly get oh god, that's really sour. It's actually really nice. It's really easy to drink.
I think it comes out. Did you, Tom? Did you say sort of like ash as well in your descriptor? Because there's definitely, it feels like a little bit tobacco.
Yeah, there is possibly a bit of tobacco-iness there, and also there's a bit of kind of I pick up a bit of kind of dry kind of minerality, kind of almost like a chalkiness there, which I think is kind of comes across as that kind of slightly ashy, maybe kind of flavour there, just in the background.
Yeah, it's not front and centre at all. I mean, the dryness and the fruitiness is what sort of starts to come through after the initial like dusty, woody aroma kind of hints I was getting. It's still quite a light beer, isn't it? It's about 5%.
Martin, I find this really fascinating actually, because I think this is where the difference in our experience with sour beers is showing, because I'm getting none of that. I'm just getting kind of tartness on it, but and a little bit of dryness on the finish. But some of the things that you were describing there, I'm picking up none of those flavors in it, and I'm guessing that's just because you've far more experience of drinking this style of beer than I have.
Yeah, it's probably part of that. Plus, the sour tartness isn't really hitting me. I feel it's there, and I know it's working its magic in the background, but it's probably more to the fore for you, Steve, anyway. And like you say, you got that hit at the back end of it. Whereas for me, it's just providing a bit of a platform for everything else. So yeah, I think it's just that journey, isn't it?
Yeah, I'd agree.
I would agree with Martin as well. That's kind of I don't perceive it as that sour tart. I get a little bit more of the funk, I guess, which is kind of that dusty vibe, and then on the nose you kind of get there's kind of a dustiness, but there's almost like a kind of peachy breathiness as well, which I think comes through a little bit more on the end. But
put it this way, it's not making me wince, so you can take that as a win.
That's a win.
yeah. I think it's fascinating what you were saying there, Tom, in terms of the process that you went through when you brew some of your beers, that you reuse your own casks for aging. And I think that very much ties into the whole ethos behind the Little Earth brand, doesn't it? Because everything you do, you try and source things locally. You try and be very environmentally aware of what you're doing. And I know when I came up to pick the beers up, you showed me a little bit around the back of the brewery as well, even to the point where you've got your own borehole and you're actually drawing water directly from the ground underneath the brewery. So was that all of that together, was that important to you when you decided you were going down the route of switching from brewing cask beer, and you were going to start making funky mixed ferm stuff, and you were going to change to become the Little Earth Project? Was all of that in the back of your mind?
Yeah. So even before we started Little Earth Project, when we were Mill Green, the cask beer, we were using some barley that we'd grown ourselves. We grow some barley organically, and we grow a few of our own hops as well. We've got, in fact, we've got 300 hop plants now. We planted another 100 last year. So even when we were doing the cask stuff, we were trying to do some kind of sustainability and environmental things. We've got a wood boiler at the brewery and a borehole, so our water comes straight from under the beer garden. For the beers we brew now, it's completely untreated. It does go through an iron filter because there's quite a lot of iron in the water that comes out of the ground. And then we heat it up for the brewing process using a wood boiler. And part of the thinking of going down the route of doing the sour beers and kind of maybe beers that are more connected to the land than cask beers where you're using lots of American hops, and the kind of just quick turnover beers where you have to sell a lot of them at a fairly low price point, rather kind of thinking, how can we make these beers really special with the things that we've already got? So we're making cider, there's wild yeast there, we've got barrels that have been used for making cider, we've got the yeast from the cider, we've got the barley that we're growing ourselves, we've got hops that we're growing ourselves, we've got a kit that's kind of that by that point was kind of fairly well used and was probably more suited to making sour beer than it was cask beer, and that all of that kind of fitted in with the kind of the sustainable aspects as well, kind of using local wood for the wood boiler, and using locally foraged fruits and other ingredients as well. So it all kind of fitted together and came together at the right time, I think.
And how did that translate once you started brewing the Little Earth beers and they started appearing in the pub? That must have been a bit of a shock to the local community to have gone from probably fairly traditional cask beers to all of this really wild, funky stuff that is all of a sudden now available.
Well, we kind of, what we try and do with the pub is always just offer a great range of beers, so of all different styles. Kind of, I think personally, both of us enjoy a wide varieties of styles of beer, and that's kind of what got us into beer in the first place. It's kind of almost unlimited, the different types of beer out there, and particularly now in the UK, kind of over the last kind of 10 or 15 years, you can get loads of different styles and they're all made very, very well in most cases. So yeah, we kind of introduced things slowly, didn't force anything on anyone, and we've kind of tweaked what's available at the pub, tried to make it more kind of local and independent breweries. So there's always options out there, whether you want a pint of cask bitter, a nice kind of session lager, or a pale ale, or an IPA, or a stout, or porter. There's something for everyone.
Yeah, I think I was quite taken aback when I walked in and saw that you had Jaipur on, and it took every ounce of will for me just to not order a pint of it because I was driving and I was like, I can't, if I start with Jaipur, I'm never going to stop.
Yeah, so I think kind of we try and sell some like absolute classics like that alongside some smaller local breweries beers, and the again, kind of, I think in East Anglia the beer selection available has really kind of taken off just in the last 3 or 4 years with people like Burnt Mill and Ampersand and Duration, and there's smaller breweries that are popping up kind of all the time now.
I'm still lost with Steve not drinking a pint of Jaipur, so you'll have to forgive me for a moment. That was I'm sure I would have thought he'd just drink it and sleep in the car or the car park or the accommodation you've got out around the back.
Couches. He could have just had a nap on the couch.
Bit too cold for camping at this time of year, even I'm not that brave.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, you are right. There is a lot of choice in East Anglia now. You've got some very good traditional brewers who are still there. And like you say, she's name-checked a couple of 2 or 3 breweries there who've definitely started to make their mark or had already made their mark as well. So it's all about giving the punters the choice then. So they can choose to dabble in your beers, or they can have some locally sourced good cask beer or keg beer, regardless of that.
Yeah. And since we reopened in April, our best-selling beer by quite a way is Crouch Vale Brewers Gold. So that's what lots of the locals drink. It's 4%. It's a good price, and you can drink pints of it, and it's super tasty. So, and there's we don't see anything wrong with that. That's fine. That's the kind of place we want it to be. We want it to be, you can come here, whether you're a local or whether you're visiting the area, or whether you're camping on a campsite, and there's something for everyone, basically.
Love it. I mean, Brewers Gold I was going to say it's a modern day classic. I'm not even sure it counts as a modern day classic. It's been around for so long now. Because where I live in South Essex, I'm not far from Crouch Vale Brewery and their tap room and stuff. So it's a fairly local one to me, but I've always been a big fan of that. And Yakima Gold as well from them.
Yeah, that's very good.
So, that sounds ideal. Even though I lived in Colchester, it just wasn't the easiest place to get to unless you did a bit of planning, as in, i.e. finding someone else to drive. So you can have the aforementioned pint of Jaipur, for example, or probably quite an expensive taxi journey there and back as well. How do you feel about it? Are you starting to see it become a bit of a destination for people to go to?
Yeah, definitely. I think particularly last summer, I think kind of lots of people were kind of introduced to the place because they weren't taking their kind of foreign holidays and stuff. So we had lots of people that kind of discovered us for the first time, and some of those people were coming back as well. So we've kind of got to be a destination pub where we are. Like you say, we're not too far from Colchester or Ipswich or Bury St Edmunds, but we're still half an hour from all of those places. So you have got to get someone willing to drive half an hour out of their way to get you there.
Or book a cottage.
Yeah, we've got a couple of little holiday chalets, so they're kind of perfect if you want to stay for a few days.
Oh, yeah, I wasn't aware of that. I thought it was. Did you? I don't know. Did you ever used to do festivals and have camping? Camping?
Yeah, the campsite's still there. It's open all year round. So we've actually had a few people staying even over the past week or so. And the cottages are starting to fill up for the summer, which is, slowly but surely, not as quickly as maybe we'd initially thought. But I think a lot of people are starting to reevaluate leaving the country this summer. So
yeah, that makes sense. So are they self-contained cottages?
Yeah, so we kind of call them like the lumberjack chalets. They're little wooden or quite big wooden things, kind of 2 floors. The bottom floor is your kitchen, living, bathroom, and then on the second floor, one of them has 2 bedrooms with one has a bunk bed and one has a double bed. And the other cottage they both sleep kind of 4, 5-ish. The second one has just kind of a double bed and a single bed and a little kind of roll out futon type thing. Single, but then they both have a fold down couch type bed downstairs as well. So we sell them as they sleep 4 comfortably, really. but yeah, I think they're quite reasonably priced. There's a kitchen, everything, you can do your own cooking, obviously. The pub, we do kind of cheese and charcuterie boards as our food offering at the minute. So obviously if you want to cook something a bit more elaborate, you have the ability to do that. We get food trucks in, or we have that done. I think they're taking January off for the most part, but we've kind of experimented with that over the summer. We had a Wagyu burger truck that absolutely destroyed it every Friday night. They had the campsite come in to get loads of burgers, and it went over really well. And it kind of saved, on our side, it saved us on staff. And we, managed to get through everything so far without having to hire a chef, which is A, really expensive, and B, apparently really hard to come by these days. So we've kind of managed to kind of tick along on a bit of a lower budget, but still, be able to get in really nice beers. And, we've put on a lot of hours behind the bar, as well as our managers who we've got in. And hopefully this summer it can kind of start picking up, and we'll be able to hire more people and kind of move from there. And we're growing it slowly.
Yeah.
But managing.
I was trying to find a different word than I'm going to use. So it sounds like it's a very organic growth. Sorry, I couldn't find another word.
All right.
But I
if
presume,
you didn't, I probably would have.
But it sounds that the way you're talking about and describing everything's been fairly incremental. It's been evolutionary rather than revolutionary. Would that be fair?
Yeah, we kind of do the whole, you've got to walk before you can run. So, I mean, there's certain things that we've, we closed for a week so we could install new taps. We obviously had plans of investing a lot more into it, and it didn't quite go the way we'd hoped, but we closed for 2 weeks in October. We did a bit more. That was right before we reopened inside. So up to that point, we'd only been open outside for the summer, just with COVID restrictions and that kind of thing. And because we have younger managers, we wanted to make sure they were vaccinated and everybody was kind of good before we unleashed the world inside. So it's kind of little baby steps, which potentially we held off longer than a lot of other places, but we had kind of outdoor space. That's one thing we do have. The outdoor space at the pub is massive. We've got a huge beer garden, we've got lots of outdoor space right outside the pub. So we were able to kind of hold off a bit on that, but obviously by mid-October, it's getting a bit cold. So we kind of closed for a couple of weeks. Managers had some holidays. Tom and I went in and, painted and put up shelves. It kind of made the place just really generally a lot cozier and a bit more comfortable. Got those couches in, that kind of thing. Just kind of changed it enough so people kind of would hopefully take note that something had changed. So obviously we'd taken on the pub in April under Little Earth Project's kind of arm. So enough to show that it changed, but not too much to show that we were trying to change the pub, for the locals and stuff. We didn't want to make it seem like it was some horrible hostile takeover. It was a bit more of, again, like you said, a natural change and a natural evolution, something that, as we go, we want to add more things to the menu as the managers feel comfortable taking that on. Ellie makes her own sourdough for the cheese and charcuterie boards. So now she's looking at doing sourdough pizza doughs to make pizzas, and kind of, again, adding little things that they can incrementally add to their day, while also not having, not forcing us to then have to hire a chef or, kitchen porters and all sorts of other things. That can kind of be, once they're busy with the pizzas, we can add more people in and we can kind of, again, slowly build it up. So hopefully by the summertime, it'll all be running like a well-oiled machine.
Well, if this summer's anything like last summer, because I think from my point of view, it felt as though there wasn't a single person on my timeline on Twitter that wasn't visiting the White Horse last summer. Whether they were going camping or staying in the lodges, it seemed as though it was very much a destination for people last year. And I think that speaks volumes in terms of how well loved you are in the beer community, in terms of the beers that you do and your approach to brewing. I'm quite interested in you said you took on the pub in April, so that would have been April 2021 that you took the pub on as part of Little Earth. Was that as a result of the previous year and the pandemic, and was that kind of a survival plan for the pub, or was it again just a natural evolution of where you were going with the business that you wanted? It made sense for it all to become the one business under the same umbrella?
I think it was, I mean, it was partly due to the pandemic, but up to that point, we'd kind of been involved-ish. So part of it comes down to Tom's dad's looking to kind of get out of his...
He's trying to retire.
He's trying to retire, basically, yeah, which he's fighting back against his own will right now. But, so we're kind of buying out the brewery because it's all kind of under his company at the minute. So we're kind of slowly taking that over. The pub, in the past, it had been leased out to different individuals over the years. And after the last landlords or managers had left in October of 2020, we kind of had a few months to really think about what we wanted to do with it, and kind of thought, well, if we're taking on this business and we're buying things out and we're kind of taking it all under our wing, it would be nice to kind of have a bit more control over what happens next door. So a little bit more of a kind of eye on what beers are on or how we're presenting ourselves, because it does, whether we were running it or not, it still looks as though it was an extension of our business because our beers were still on. You know, you still want the people that are behind the bar to be representing you as a company. Like I said, regardless of whether or not they're being paid by you or not, they still kind of represent, because people look at them and say, well, you're next door to these guys, therefore, you know, what do you have to say about it? So, you know, we wanted to kind of hire people who had maybe a little bit more recent craft beer experience, maybe, versus maybe traditional landlords that we've had in the past. I think everybody's kind of had their own thing as they've taken the pub on, whereas we kind of had a bit more of a vision, especially with the campsite and the cottages and everything that we could kind of put together to make this destination brewery, taproom, pub. I suppose it is a bit of a control thing, I guess. I don't know, just being able to kind of have a better handle on the way we can push it and the way people perceive it and how we can take it forward. And it's much easier when it's all under one roof.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that makes sense to me. I know you've used the word control there, but you're quite right. People are going to want to know a bit more about the beers if they do decide to try them. And I'm going to assume a natural link anyway. If the beers are being brewed feet away from where they're drinking them, they're going to assume there's a connection of some kind. And so you do want whoever's serving them to have a little bit about them as well, because they are going to be asked questions, or they might want to offer something, like you say, yes, you want a lager, are you sure you want a pint of this just now, or do you want to have a taste of that kind of thing, because they know themselves what it's going to be like. So it does make sense to bring this all together. It does, from the outside looking in, forgetting about the money side of it, but from a practical point of view, bringing all those elements under literally the One Little Earth Project umbrella, I think makes perfect sense. Even if you've had to sort of do it slowly, build up to it, as you say, walk before you run. To me, it all seems to work. It hangs together as a plan.
Yeah. Lots of it is like you say, getting the right people behind the bar that know what they're talking about and understand our beer and understand craft beer. And the guys we've got at the moment, Ellie and Ben, they're both the former Brewdog general managers, both managing bars in London. So it's a bit of a change of pace, but they've got a good background, and they've brought kind of an element of professionalism, but also an element of kind of passion and knowledge for the products as well. So it's all going in the right direction.
And sort of just quickly sticking with what has occurred pretty much over the last 2 years now. How was your, how did you survive? I mean, what did you do to help yourself survive? We've spoken to lots of breweries, and I don't think there's been a universal approach by anyone, to be honest. It's been more about pivoting to something that works for them. So, what worked for you?
Well, our beer is obviously, again, very different to most breweries' beers. So, we didn't have loads of beer in kegs and cask and cans that needed to be sold immediately. So we took the opportunity to age stuff a little bit longer, age stuff in bottles a little bit longer. So we had this massive advantage is that we weren't going to throw anything out, but our kind of cash flow was certainly going to take a hit. And in our business, cash flow is already incredibly difficult when you're paying for ingredients sometimes 3 years before you're selling the beer that ingredient made. So we kind of just took a little bit of a hit, as big a hit as we could, and kind of used it as an opportunity to make the beer better and to also make the business kind of stronger going forward.
We did, though, work with quite a lot. Like, we don't have our own online shop, so we still kind of tried to reach out and continue to work with as many, bottle shops and people there. I mean, so many businesses pivoted to have an online shop, and a lot of bottle shops did as well. So we were quite happy to continue to work with them. Our distributors still, we kind of maybe lost one or two, but we still continue to work with certain ones, and we still work with them now. And it kind of it works because our supply to them didn't really change. We weren't, we don't have a new beer every 2 weeks, so it was still quite manageable for them to take X amount every, say, 2 months or something like that. And those relationships kind of stayed very much the same. But we did a lot more, like, invest in, when we were ordering more bottles, when we swapped to 375s, we invested in 5 pallets worth, because it was, we had to order them from France, and it was, issues with Brexit and all sorts of other things that we ended up just getting 5 pallets in, which was a massive investment when that some of those bottles are still sitting upstairs because we haven't even released them yet. So there was kind of a bit of it was a time of kind of investing and packaging and preparing and planning, which is very necessary, especially for a brewery, which it feels difficult to plan ahead for sometimes, because we don't know when things are necessarily going to be ready. We can kind of, sit at the start of the year and try and map it out, but
doesn't always work.
It doesn't always work.
But we were kind of put in quite a fairly difficult position as well, because over the winter of 19 to 20, we basically started putting everything into 750ml bottles, and then 3 months later, no one was sharing any beer.
Which is why you'll start to see a lot more 375s coming out. So we kind of pivoted to that.
Well, speaking of drinking, I think we've got to the one which Steve was trying to keep secret for some bizarre reasons earlier on.
I don't know why.
So while Steve and I get this in the glass, perhaps again, I think you've already spoken a little bit about it, but is there anything else you wanted to add about this beer? The Stupid Sexy Suffolk Blend 4.
You've not made that easy to say after a few beers.
It's got a silly name. So this beer is it's kind of our take on a Flanders Red, which it's kind of a beer style that goes back a long way, and is kind of the predecessor to the kind of British Porter. So kind of a barrel-aged, reddish, brownish coloured beer that's kind of got some sweetness to it, got some body to it, got some of that character coming from the oak as well, but also kind of quite sharp, quite acidic, got some kind of some dark berry flavours coming through. So yeah, something I think I like this type of beer because it's kind of beer that you can drink kind of throughout the year. It's not something that's, you can cool it down and it's a refreshing kind of tart fruity beer in the summer, or you can have it maybe slightly warmer sitting in front of the fire. So
goes great with cheese.
Goes great with cheese.
So it's a good Christmas beer.
Everything goes great with cheese. Anyway, cheers. I'm going to.
Why we have the boards at the pub, because all of our beers go so well with them.
Steve,
I really like that. Actually, I like the combination of flavors that are going on now. I like the fact that you've got some more of the darker fruits coming through, and some of those characteristics are playing well with each other. It's obviously picking up some of the oaky notes. There's a little sweet hint of vanilla right in the background there, and then the finish for me is like it's like sherbet. It's like crushed up refreshers that have been kind of sprinkled into your mouth, or you've put a whole packet of refreshers in your mouth and you're instantly regretting it, sort of thing. It's really tart and sharp on that finish. Mine is really, really cold, but I get the impression that as this slowly comes to room temperature and as it warms a little bit, you'd probably get a whole different host of flavors and characteristics from it. There's more in there that I can't get to at the moment because it's too cold.
Mine is a bit more. Sorry, I was just going to say mine's a bit warmer than Steve because where I'm doing the recording. I was going to ask, can you make it sharper and more sour, please? Obviously, Steve has just said
our past blends have been, and this one we really tried to blend it to make it a bit more of a I don't want to say easy drinker, but a bit more rounded, I suppose, because other ones in the past have been quite sharp, and we've had, I suppose, more mixed feedback on it. Whereas, I don't know, this one, we've also had this one in bottles a lot longer. It's been out for a few months as well. Plus we kept things in bottles a bit longer. I think it had more time to round out before we released it.
Just talk us through that blending process. I know you mentioned it earlier that you said you've got a number of different barrels that contribute to this every year. Do you literally try some of the beer from every single barrel and then essentially just sit there and go, well, I think these will work together? Or do you actually pour some out and then play with different combinations? How does that process actually work?
Yeah, we do occasionally pull beer out from lots of different barrels. Lots of our blends are kind of relatively small. It's obviously sour beer, it's not the easiest to sell, so having thousands and thousands of bottles of the same beer is not always a great idea. But some of the ones like this particular beer is we do pull beer off from different barrels. So some of the newer batches, some of the newer barrels that went into this batch were from batches that we're also using to age in barrels. So sometimes the beer will taste better when it's young, and then you want to use that for blending maybe with an older beer, and then vice versa. So we don't have a massive stock of barrels, so it's not ridiculously complex, but there is a little bit of kind of drawing off and trying several barrels together.
This is what the Lambic brewers do, though, isn't it? When they blend their young beers with some of the older ones, this is exactly what they do. And some of them are just blenderies as well, aren't they?
Yeah. So some of them don't make their own wort, so they're just putting other people's wort, which is just kind of sugary liquid, into barrels, letting it ferment kind of 1, 2, 3 years, and then picking out barrels from kind of each one of those vintages, I guess, and blending them together.
And I think also, doesn't it also go back to the historic origins of porter? That's what they used to do with porter, wasn't it? They used to blend old and young porter to get a fresh batch, and that was almost done behind the bar or in the cellar of the pub. It was blended by the publican back then. And I think you said that obviously the Flanders Red style has some of its origins in with porter, and I find it fascinating how all of these different traditions all end up kind of almost emanating from similar points in time.
Yeah, so this kind of style of beer was certainly kind of aging beer in large wooden vessels. Wasn't really done much in this country. It's and as you say, lots of it was done by the publicans. So they'd have an old barrel that had been sitting in their cellar for a year, and they'd blend it with one 50-50 maybe with one that had just turned up from the brewery. They used to describe it as things like stale beer, which doesn't make it taste that nice. And again, that's where mild comes from. So mild was just a young beer. So you'd mix kind of a stale beer with a mild beer and end up with something kind of a little bit in between that had a bit of sweetness, but also had a bit more of that character and had mellowed a little bit.
I do find that fascinating that when Steve's reminded me that I just can't picture what people's faces would be like if they knew that's what the barman was doing. Just hold on a second. Something we've been leaving for a year. Just going to put some of that in here. And then I'm going to top it up with some of the new stuff, which we're not ready to put on yet. And here you go. It just sort of blows your mind that that's what we were doing X amount of years ago. And everyone was quite happy with it. And presumably it must have tasted good, because regardless of the time you're doing it, a punter is a punter. They'll give something back if they don't like it.
Well, what we quite enjoy is when you get people who come in and kind of obviously aren't a massive fan of the beer that we're doing, and they kind of say, oh, like, don't you have just like a normal beer or something? And we try and explain to people, well, actually, like, this is what beer was before. Like, you know, historically this was beer before all your big macros and stuff came along. Like, this is what people were drinking. So, you know, depends how far back you want to go to what normal beer.
Yeah, that's true, because the stock ales that I've had in the past have all had that sort of Bretty woody tang to it, or twang. It definitely wasn't as clean as modern beers are. I mean, this is I think this is a really good example of a Flanders Red. I said, for me, I would quite happily have tasted the pre-blend, maybe to get some of the fresher, younger aroma and flavours, and maybe a bit more of the sharpness. That would have appealed to me, I have to admit. But it is very well rounded. It's very, very easy to drink, I think. And yes, and Dani, are you responsible for the labelling as well? Because this one says will go really well with the cheese and charcuterie.
I am. Yes, that's another string in my bow.
Always on brand.
Always on brand. Yeah.
When the recording's finished, you'll find Martin sitting somewhere near the cheese and crackers later. Can't imagine why.
So obviously, we've spoken about the last couple of years has been a bit of a challenge in terms of you both as a brewery and for the pub. As we come into 2022 and things are hopefully looking a little bit brighter, where do you look at taking Little Earth Project in over the next year, 18 months or so? What are your plans for the future?
I think that Martin said earlier, it's kind of this organic growth rather than kind of going crazy and wanting to be a massive brewery or kind of or going too crazy. It's about just growing slowly, and if the demand's there for us to make a bit more beer, then we'll see how we can do that and how we can do it in a way that kind of works for us. And the same with the pub. You know, our beer is very much kind of about of a place. And we kind of want people to enjoy it where it's being made. We send beer all over the country and we export a little bit as well, but kind of ideally we want a lot of it to be sold kind of a few yards away from where it's being produced. So I think just trying to integrate the pub and the brewery more is going to be kind of a big thing, and do some open days and tastings in the pub, and try and get more people out to visit us. I think that's the thing.
On the flip side, we're also planning on trying to do as many festivals as we can, because we cancelled quite a few in 2020. There were a couple that kind of still tried to go on, and we kind of just pulled it because we were trying to focus on getting the pub going again, and kind of took a bit of a hit because I kind of feel like maybe we've fallen out of regular viewing, maybe not quite in the fore of everyone's mind, maybe quite as much as potentially we were, because I felt like we were on a really good trajectory coming into kind of the start of 2019. We literally did a big event or a tasting event in Sheffield the weekend everything got locked down, or right the weekend before. So we were out in Sheffield in large groups right before, you know, the country locked down. So it kind of felt like we had lots of things planned. We've already basically signed up for 4 or 5 festivals already this year. So maybe working through some of our keg stock and just kind of getting ourselves out there again, because it is literally just the two of us doing all of the bits.
I think you're selling yourselves a little bit short there in terms of saying that you've fallen out of people's minds a little bit, because I think there are there are a handful of people in the UK that are doing the styles of beer that you do, the mixed fermentation stuff. And I think when those discussions are had, certainly when I'm involved in those discussions and when I see them online, you're one of the first handful of breweries that are always mentioned in those discussions in terms of what you do. So I think maybe you're not seeing it, but I think the beer community is still very much aware that you're there and that you're still producing what are excellent beers.
Oh, well, thanks. Well, then potentially it's more of us just kind of getting out there and maybe really making more of a, maybe capitalizing more on where people can find our beer. Because we do tend to get a lot of messages about, oh, where can I find it? And I feel like, you know, it's out there and I see it. I mean, I reckon, Martin, you can probably still find Blend 3 in a shop somewhere. You know, there's still, you know, I don't know how to say so. Like every release we do isn't a complete sell, like immediately, that kind of thing. Like, and I'm not saying that that will probably be the level we'll have to be before we start expanding at a much faster rate. So I suppose maybe it's just because we are kind of a bit more remote and maybe a bit more cut off from, you know, those conversations maybe in a more social way, that being at festivals and kind of getting ourselves, like I said, a bit more out in front of people will just kind of feed back. And I mean, getting more people coming out to stay, because I mean, we kind of really pushed that leading up to lockdown, and I think we saw the fruits of that with the amount of people that came out to see us last summer. So I think we did a big push. We had lots of, you know, we're sending out loads of flyers. We were doing quite a lot of festivals and kind of reminding people that we had all these options. So I think when everything locked down, we were maybe a little bit more in the front of people's minds to come and visit. So it's kind of just keeping that, I guess, keeping that up there, because we aren't releasing a new beer every couple of weeks. It's kind of making sure that we're staying kind of chatty and out in the open all the time.
Can you name any of the festivals you're planning to be at, so that, you know, our listeners can perhaps look out for you?
Yeah, we're really excited. We're going to the These Hills Festival that Beak Brewery are putting on down in Lewis,
Sussex. Yeah.
Sussex, in June. I believe we need a bit. I haven't heard much information. I think it's still kind of in planning stages, but there's a festival just in Felixstowe, so for the locals, that Hopsters are putting on, I think, end of March. So keep an ear out for that. And we're actually potentially, it's in the planning stages of putting our own sour festival on at the pub in July. So we're kind of still getting all the details ironed out. But if you like your sour beer, Martin.
Oh, that sounds good.
Second week in July.
might have to have a look into that. You'll have to, as soon as you've decided on dates, make sure it gets out there.
Yeah,
I'd definitely be interested. But no, I would agree with Steve that certainly in the beer community, beer bubble that I exist in with Steve, when we have these kind of conversations about these types of beers, you're up there with the best of them. And having had these 4 tonight side by side, and I say 4 because I opened up with a sour as well when we were chatting offline. I had your black currant and rye sour, and I've enjoyed all 4 of them, and I think they've all actually, for me, have been very well-rounded beers. And like I said, I could probably want a few of them to be maybe a bit tart, especially the fruitier ones, to maybe be a bit tartar and a bit more cutting and a bit sharper. But I definitely think there's an appeal out there. I think the last beer Steve described as crushed refreshers, I would have gone down like the sour Haribo route, but it's a fairly similar analogy, I suppose. So you've got those fruit flavors, you've got that, there's a bit of spikiness to it. I think they really work very easy to drink, and they're all still in a fairly decent range. It just goes to show you don't have to make these kind of beers all the time at a stupid ABV level. Yeah, I think there's a skill there about making these beers as flavoursome, as aromatic, and as easy to drink, but still keeping the ABV in a decent place as well. So definitely on the right track. I like the 375 bowls. I like the labelling. I think there's a lot going on right here, and hopefully 2022 will be kind.
Well, what we'll do is we'll make sure there are links in the show notes to where people can find out about what you're doing, where they can follow you on social, where they can book to stay at the pub, and how they can come to see you. I know at the moment you've not got your own online store, but there are plenty of bottle shops and plenty of online suppliers that do stock Little Earth beers. You do just have to kind of search them out a little bit, and you have to kind of know your local supplier, so to speak, and the sort
local
of beers.
Supplier.
Yeah,
sounds a bit dodgy, Steve.
Yeah. And if your local supplier doesn't have it, make sure they give us a call.
Get them to get in touch. It's been an absolute pleasure drinking these beers with you this evening, and having you on the podcast as well. And thank you very much. I should say you did gift these beers to us, and we are very, very grateful for that. So thank you very much for giving us the beers to try. Again, I will openly admit I'm not the biggest fan of these style of beers, but I can appreciate the work that's gone into them and what's come out the other end. I really, really enjoyed that lager, and I would happily drink pints of that. The Simcoe Sour was maybe a bit much for me, but the stupid, sexy Suffolk blend is right there where I want it to be. It's very, very tart on the finish, and I don't know how much of it I could drink, but I'd like to be able to drink more of it than I probably could, if I'm honest, because it is really tasty. There's so much going on.
That's a really good start.
Martin, what is coming up on the next show?
Well, I've looked at the planner and it's blank. So I've got no idea what beers we're doing, no idea what subject we're discussing. So it's going to be a bit of a surprise to both you and I, Steve, let alone the listeners.
Brilliant. I love it when we're that planned that we actually know what we're doing on the next show. I'm looking forward to it, whatever it is. Dani, Tom, again, thank you for giving up your time to be with us this week. Good luck with everything that you're doing at both the brewery and the pub and the campsite and the lodges and everything. I hope 2022 is a fantastic year for you both.
Thank you
so much. Thanks for having us.
Cheers.
And come on out and stay sometime.
So thank you to our listeners for tuning in. We'll look forward to sharing more opinions with you soon. Cheers.
Cheers.